Welcome everyone to our Cloud Cafe called the day after COP26. Or COP26 continues if you prefer. Lots of us, of course, have been watching developments constantly, and we think it's still going on as we speak. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. Can I just ask, could you stick your hand up if you were at COP at some point in the last 2 weeks? So that's Molly, Maggie, Carla, and Juliet. And is that a hand up or is that some other thing happening? Some other thing. Right, thank you. So welcome to one and all. And I'd first like to ask my friend Elizabeth to set us in context of what the Cloud Cafes are. Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm never quite sure with microphones.
I think pointed a bit more towards at your mouth rather than speaking over it.
Okay, that's okay. Okay. Just to let you know that our Cloud Cafes are normally online, and they're usually on the, well, they're always actually on the second Wednesday of every month. And because they're online, we have an amazing array of speakers from all over the world and on lots and lots of different topics. So if you're interested in coming to more Cloud Cafes, then just look at the front page of the Green Party website, and the next Cloud Cafe you'll be able to register with.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And you will have noticed that our friend Alan Mossman has a stall at the back with some literature, if you're interested later. Right then, so the day after COP26, our first speaker, Carla Denia, is the co-leader of the Green Party with Adrian Ramsey and a councillor for Clifton Down in Bristol, part of the largest Green councillor group in the UK. In 2018, Carla proposed the first climate emergency declaration in Europe, committing Bristol to go carbon neutral by 2030 and inspiring hundreds of other organisations to follow her lead. Carla is the Green Party's housing and communities spokesperson with a track record of standing up for renters and working to prevent homelessness. Before entering politics, Carla worked as a renewable energy engineer, specialising in offshore and onshore wind. We're very pleased to have you with us, Carla, and I hope you will give us the national perspective on COP26.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Hello, Stroud. It was actually pointed out to me a couple of days ago after I provided that biog that it is 3 years to the day that our climate emergency motion passed in Bristol. Yeah, well, maybe, we'll see. As you saw, I put my hand up then. I was one of us who were at COP26, the climate talks in Glasgow. And I was there along with a lot of other Green Party members from Greens of England and Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and across Europe, who were there to put forward the Greens' bold and common sense policies, try and get them to the centre of political debate, try and move the dial in the right direction, pull all the other global leaders with us a little bit. So I spent a lot of time up there talking about policies like a carbon tax, which, where are you, Molly? Carbon tax is, sorry Molly, not very sexy, but surprisingly popular. There was a bit of research that came out a few weeks before COP that was unbelievably helpful. It was by Demos, and it was the largest survey of its kind of public opinions on climate policies, and it showed that 94% of the 22,000 person representative sample liked carbon tax. It was the most popular policy, even though they understood that that would mean that some products and services would become more expensive. And of course, that's Green Party policy. So at Molly's urging, I banged on about that. at every possible opportunity. And our other fantastic green policies as well, things like climate reparations. And, you know, we managed to, don't know if I can single-handedly claim credit, but we managed to move the dial a little bit on those issues and get other people talking about them as well. You might have noticed that George Eustice mentioned carbon tax several times in the last few weeks. And there have been some positive announcements that have come out of the COP climate talks so far. I expect probably if you're in this room, you've been watching them quite closely, so I won't tell you what you probably already know in any great detail, but there was some positive stuff on coal and methane and deforestation, for example, but a lot of it was re-announcing old commitments rather than anything actually new. There was often little or no way of enforcing what was being said, and often the key polluters, the worst offenders, were missing from some of these agreements. For example, the 5 biggest coal consumers were all missing from the agreement about phasing out coal. And I expect you've all seen that in the last few days, negotiations have unfortunately watered it down further. The phrase that particularly caught my eye was in the first draft, it said, quote, accelerate the phasing out of coal and subsidies for fossil fuels. And there was some surprise about how positive that was. The latest version, caveated, I've been on a train for a bit, so unless something else has happened, the latest version when I left Bristol was accelerating efforts towards the phase out of unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. So efficient fossil fuel subsidies are fine then. So yeah, anyway, we all know this. It's clear from the draft final agreement that world leaders are failing to achieve the diplomatic breakthrough that we were all hoping for and that we need to prevent catastrophic climate change. The draft agreement as it stands at the moment clearly fails to keep 1.5 degrees alive. It has the world on track for warming well above 2 degrees at present, and we all know how bad that would be. The Green Party highlighted 5 key tests that the COP26 agreement needed to pass for us to consider it a success. Those 5 tests were that offsetting should be outlawed as part of the measurement of net zero reporting from governments and industries so that they can't pass it on to other countries via carbon credits. That loss and damage should be front and centre of any agreement to aid countries that are on the front line experiencing the worst impacts of the climate crisis now. That phasing out of fossil fuels must be core to the agreement. That there must be some system of carbon pricing to ensure that the true cost of fossil fuels and other high carbon products and services are properly accounted for. And that there must be a proper process for checking the nationally determined contributions, so the contributions to carbon cutting that each country offers. Unless something really miraculous happens in the next few hours, none of these are going to be met. So what can we do about it? I've been asked to reflect on my experience at COP and also to answer the question what we can do as a local community to help achieve some of the targets, because we don't have to wait for the next COP in a year. We don't have to wait for international negotiations and national governments to act. Our democracy here isn't perfect. Local government doesn't have as much power as it should have, but we still have, I mean, we're very lucky here in Stroud District to have Greens as part of the administration. So there are things that can be done at a local level, and let's try and hang on to a glimmer of hope and figure out what's the best things we can be getting on with now rather than waiting for those in power to act. I really appreciate the framing of this question as it said, what can we do as a local community? Because I've been asked quite a few times over the last few weeks, what can I do as an individual? And some of you might have seen Natalie Bennett, former Green Party leader and now member of the House of Lords, has a good quote, which apparently originally was from Bill McKibben, the US environmental activist. When he was asked, what can I do as an individual? His answer was, be a bit less of an individual. Join together with others in movements large enough to make change. And the sort of slightly less funny, but equally on point part of Bill McKibben's answer is, we don't need everybody in the same place. We don't need 51% of people all the time. We do need some strong segment of the population really engaged in this fight and working hard, and that's us. We can pull everybody else with us if there's enough of us to do that. So what can we do? The first thing I'd say, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I think it's worth saying, is do something. And I say that because I know that the eco-anxiety can be crippling, and it can be all too easy to sit and think, I'm just one person, this is terrifying, I'm never going to be able to make any change, and it's just awful, and I'd rather block it out and not think about it. But I can tell you from personal experience that that feeling lessens or goes away completely if you're doing something to tackle it. It just, yeah, if you do it for no other reason, do it because you'll feel better and you'll sleep better at night. So what specifically should we be doing? Since I was asked to focus on what we can do at a local community level, I was first having a think about, assuming that most of the people joining us this evening are from Stroud or nearby, what we could do at a town or district level. Well, Stroud District Council, being made up as it is of quite a few Greens, are already doing very well on their own emissions, and I'm sure that Simon will be talking about that in a bit. So, to be honest, I don't suggest that there's much to be gained from lobbying Stroud District Council. I think they're already on board and they're doing it as quickly as they can. And if I said anything else, Simon would probably be giving me evils along with several other people in the room. But really, it's true. So yeah, Stroud District Council are doing a good job on cutting their own emissions very well. But what I am interested in, and Simon and others may touch on this, is what the council can do to reduce the emissions in the district as a whole. So there are some things that the council has direct control over, but the vast majority of activity and therefore emissions in the district, the council won't have direct control over, but it might in some cases have soft power to persuade, signpost, facilitate. It might also have some enforcement powers that it's not currently using to the maximum that it could. I certainly know that that's the case in Bristol. So those of you who are councillors or candidates or connected to the council in some way, I would suggest looking at if there's any enforcement powers or supporting homeowners, for example, and what the balance is between enforcing, subsidising, helping in a non-monetary way, etc. And I hear a lot of people talk about that, and I haven't heard someone come up with a good answer of exactly what balance of those works best. There's also, of course, Gloucestershire County Council, which is less green, seeing some knowing nods. So what about the things in its remit? I would have thought that's a prime focus for community level campaigning. And as I mentioned, you know, we've got many flaws in our democracy, one of which is that not very much power is given to local authorities from national government. We have one of the most centralized political systems, certainly in Europe, I think in the global north, in terms of our cities and towns can't set their own taxes, they can't set their own laws in the same way that they can in many of our sister cities in the US and Europe. So lobbying national government for the funding and the powers needed to actually do the things that councils could be doing right now to reduce carbon emissions. And then, of course, there's local issues that very much affect this area, but are outside the council's direct control. And the obvious one to me as an outsider is trains. I'm very much aware of the campaign to reopen Stroud Water Station. I hear there's been some progress on that in the last few weeks, which is very exciting. And I very much support that as somebody that tried to get here via public transport from Bristol, and it was a bit fraught. But I guess I would just say don't rest easy believing that it's going to happen just because a Tory minister has said it's going to, because we know the value of Tory ministers' promises. I'm not going to talk about what you can do as individuals, because I don't I think probably you all know this stuff, and I don't feel like it's a helpful thing to focus on, except to say that all of the things that you've probably already done in your individual lives in terms of where your money is invested, the food you eat, how your home's insulated and run, and so on. Have you engaged with the communities that you're part of about those things as well? Whether it's your school, your church, your workplace, you could lobby for them to switch pension provider, switch energy provider, double glaze the church windows, all that kind of thing. So if you haven't already, that kind of thing is where I cut my teeth, lobbying for Quakers in Britain to divest from fossil fuels, for example, when I was a young Quaker. So that kind of area is rich for effective campaigning. And finally, something that you can do to tackle climate change is get involved in politics if you're not already. I know there'll be a lot of Green Party members here, but probably not everyone. And I'm going to quote Natalie Bennett again and say one of her favourite phrases, which is, make politics something you do, not something that you have done to you. If you want politics to be different, if you want to see more people like yourself in politics, then don't just sit there and wish it to happen. Get involved and make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. I'm afraid I neglected to mention housekeeping things right at the beginning. I do apologise. In the unlikely event of our having to evacuate the building, the main exit is there halfway down that wall. Toilets are at the back. And I'm sure you've all turned your phones off, so you don't need to be reminded about that. We're going to go through all of the speakers and then take questions at the end of that. And I'm very delighted to welcome our second speaker, Dan, who is a youth striker from Archway School. Wonderful to have you with us, Dan. Do come and give us some thoughts.
So the youth perspective, it's quite sought after nowadays, but it could be getting bleak. Because honestly, after this, I am losing hope, and I'm not alone. But specifically, I'm losing hope for 1.5 degrees. It's seeming an impossible target now. If things carry on going the way that they have with this agreement, I genuinely don't think we're going to get there. And that's horrible to say, but I think we've got to be realistic. I think we've got to be realistic with ourselves on what consequences we are going to see in the coming years. And we've got to be realistic of what we've got to do about it, to adapt, to mitigate the consequences so that it's not as bad as it could be. But does this mean that we have to stop campaigning and protesting? No, we've got to step that up, but that can't be it. Because we've got to win people over and change as a whole community. We've got to bring people along. Because if COP's shown anything, it's shown that when your conferences and your gatherings are so exclusive and leave so many people out, they don't get there. They don't have the scale or the urgency needed. So as our communities, we've got to engage with those who aren't here. Because as Carla said, we're all doing things, we're all involved. But it's the people who aren't that we've got to get on our side. We've got to get seeing the scale and to bring along with us. They can't be forgotten in this fight because it's their fight too. Even if they aren't acting on every eco thought, it's often those who are left out of conversations who are most hard hit. So to act on this, we've got to look not at governments necessarily, because they clearly aren't taking it seriously. So we've got to do whatever we can to take that power into our own hands, to build our own future. Because if young people are starting to lose hope, we risk young people becoming apathetic towards the issues that matter. So we've got to, I'm calling on you and everyone listening and everyone you go home to talk to show a new future to young people and to everyone in your wider community, to show that a future is possible and that there is still some hope, that we don't have to get to 2 degrees. Because that, if 1.5 degrees is bad, 2 is even worse. And 3, don't even want to think about. So we've got to do things now. We've got to look at things which are affected locally, whether that's all the houses being built in floodplains. If it's hard enough for young people especially to buy houses now, imagine when thousands of homes are flooded. Where are we going to live, for example? If energy and food supplies are being disrupted so easily already, we've got to think about where those are coming from and how stable our supply chains are. And this has got to start now, before it's too late to act on it. This is what I think we should take away from COP, is that it's got to be us now. It's got to be from the ground up. It's got to be inclusive, cooperative. It's got to be wider than just the Green Party as well, even if that means working with other parties you don't always get along with. You've got to try and force them to listen, to force them to take this message forward in a practical sense so that people's lives aren't worsened because of it. Because we need this radical change. We need a complete reorganization of our societies based on communities, based on cooperation, and based on justice for those who have been left behind. This is what must happen, because otherwise hope will be lost, and that's the truth of it, unfortunately. But if we really want this change, we've got to make hope possible, not just wish that despair and the chaos forecast wins people over. We've got to offer a solution. We've got to offer a way out, basically, because we need to regain some sense of wider hope, of wider ambition and energy around this movement. With the strikes, they've been knocked back by the pandemic, and I don't know how many people would come to them again now, because I think lots of people have turned off. They've seen these headlines about COP, and there doesn't seem to be a way out. It doesn't seem to many people I've spoken to that we can have a good future. So is that what young people have got to look forward to? So I don't think it has to be. I think another way is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And just as a point of information, there is a young green group starting in Stroud. I know that Rajay here tonight and Noah, who is our Young Greens photographer, are both around in the room. Where is Noah? There you are. Yeah. I'd love now to welcome Juliet Davenport, our third speaker. Juliet is a climate scientist, a renewable pioneer, a businesswoman, an environmental activist, just back from COP as well. Juliet spent more than 20 years not just advocating for solutions to climate change, but actively creating them. Having achieved degrees in atmospheric physics and economics, Juliet founded one of the UK's first 100% renewable electricity suppliers in 1999. An innovator whose contribution to climate action over the last 2 decades is amongst the greatest in the UK. She's a figurehead for climate change action, and she's going to talk to us tonight about the business perspective. Juliet, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Dan, my heart goes out to you. You make me feel so sad when I listen to you. So I kind of hope that I might bring a little hope into the room, perhaps. So not necessarily from COP, because I always feel that governments, one of the reasons I set up a business was because I felt that the government, and that's government in its totality, whether it's our regulators, whether it's our civil servants, was failing the climate agenda. And this was about 30 years ago. I spent some time in Brussels, Molly will know that, and the machine was very slow. And I wanted to set up a business so that it could be in the room when all the other businesses were trying to lobby government to keep the status quo. And that is the thing that happens. One of the reasons for going to COP as a business is that there were 500 members of the oil and gas industry there lobbying for their position. They were as big as the 7th biggest country that attended COP. So that's what we're against. And that is why I think businesses, as well as the rest of the orchestra, is an important factor in trying to make sure that things change. And if I look at it overall, I mean, there were a lot of announcements at COP, but I kind of think of the sector, the 5 things that we need to be able to move at speed to be able to deliver on zero carbon. The first thing is research and innovation. This country is one of the leading research and innovators in the world. We have amazing science in this country. We don't always use it in the best way. And actually, if you look at the last 10 years, where we spent our research and innovation cash, we spent nearly 4 billion in medicine. Fine, that seems reasonable. We're a country, we want to keep people healthy. We spent 4 million in aerospace. Okay, maybe not so fine. We spent 4 million in automotive. We spent less than 0.2 million in energy. So for me, that is a big challenge in terms of where do we put our cash today will influence where we are tomorrow. And there are some green shoots on the horizon. There is now a net zero innovation strategy for the UK, first time ever. We're now going to start reporting on how much money we are spending on new technologies, because if we carry on spending them on the old technologies, we won't move forward. So that is one thing. And we have the Centre of Research here in Swindon. It's very close by. So if nothing else, we should be persuading our young people to think about if they want to go and go into that sector, then research and innovation in new technologies to help solve this future. The next bit is our networks. So in the energy sector, we have 3 key networks that were built in a fossil dense industry. So that is the electricity networks, the gas networks, and the road networks. And all of those were in a high carbon world. We built them trying to transport, so the electricity network was built in mind of 30 power stations to deliver power from centralized power stations to individuals' homes. Under a zero carbon world, that needs to change. Renewables, by design, are decentralized. We can take power into our own homes, literally. And that's an investment that needs to happen. And for me, that is where it's some of the detail and difficultness about this industry, but it's absolutely key if we are going to deliver on that. And for me, that's behind. We need to keep the pressure up to make sure national grid, our local grids, are designed for us. They're designed so that we can deliver power to our own homes. 80% of this country is connected to the gas grid. For me, we're going to have to figure a way to write part of that off. If we're going to have a future, we're going to have to decarbonize that. And most of that's going to be about electrification of heat. So that's going to have to, somebody's going to have to bite the bullet, and that's going to be government is going to have to figure out how to write off that gas grid. The next one is the transport network, built around cars, essentially. We're going to have to figure out how we deal with that transport network in our cities. How do we make our cities less surrounded by the car, more surrounded by us walking, going by public transport, cycling. But for those of us who can't live in a city, who need to live in cars, we need to think about how we deliver. Electric is the way it's going, and it's going fast. And that's quite exciting. We can see that start to move, but we need to see it move faster. The next area is regulation. In the electricity industry alone, there are 12,000 pages of regulation. It's an incredibly difficult industry to get into. And our regulator does not have a remit on zero carbon. We need to set at a high level the fact that zero carbon needs to go through every single part of our regulation, a bit like Brighton Rock. Whenever you cut it, it should have zero carbon in it. And we won't deliver on zero carbon unless we see that. And that will then start to support the financial sector. Now, we all, I don't know whether everybody has a pension in this room, but there's probably some kind of savings. That money needs to go somewhere. And one of the reasons why it has found it difficult to go green are there are not enough green projects that are investable in. We need our regulation to make sure that we can release more of that capital into the market and really put it to work. Because wow, the Western European countries, we have a huge amount of capital to put to work, and we can, and we need to. And one of the biggest things for me is, how do we get that into developing countries? How do we make sure that for those countries where we can put our money to work properly, we can really do that easily? And right now, that's not possible. If you want to invest in most African countries, you can't do it. Yet those are the countries that really need investment. The next part is customers. So when people say that we can't do anything individually, what's been recognized by the Climate Change Committee and the IEA report is that 70% of the next stage of innovation is going to come in people's homes. So it's going to be about what happens in our homes, whether we do it or somebody else supports that. That's going to be incredibly important. And I love the point that was made earlier, is that probably most people here have already done everything. So invite people into your house, have an open house, not an open garden, have an open eco house. Show people around, get them comfortable. People are frightened of change. They don't like new technologies. I talked to my dad, and it's quite hard work. I don't know about you, but trying to talk about, so he'll embrace certain things and then he won't let go of his oil boiler. It sort of freaks him out. And I think taking people on a journey, whether you just take 5 people on a journey to a zero carbon sort of future, is really important, and supporting them in that, because they don't trust the energy companies. People don't trust big companies anymore, but they do trust their communities. And it's an incredibly important part of delivering this. And then finally, we need the skills. So we do need our next generation of young people. We haven't got enough skills to deliver on zero carbon. We've got about 600,000 skill gap to deliver on a zero carbon future. That means we need to look to our schools, need to be training the people of the future. And they don't all have to be engineers, but we need a plethora, we need a diversity of thought coming out of our schools and our universities and our technical colleges, and going into apprenticeships to be able to deliver on this. And if anybody can do anything, that is local government can support in terms of what the schools are doing and how they're doing it. One of the most depressing things for me in the sector is if you look at the senior leadership in the energy sector, about 14% are women. 78% of energy companies don't have a single woman on their senior leadership team. That means there is no diversity of thought. There is no challenge in those companies to really think about a future. And if you want energy companies to think about a future with a wider community in mind, you need a wider set of people on that base. And I think that for me is one of the key messages, is that we need everybody to be part of this. The skills that we need, the people that we need to get involved. Businesses are just people. They're people come together to deliver something. And if there's one thing I do hope coming out of COP, is that we will see all those activists become entrepreneurs. My vision would be is that every single activist on the streets, not every single one, because we need lots of people to do politics and everything else, but let's say a fifth of those activists could become entrepreneurs and set up the companies of tomorrow. That would be amazing. And that's why one of the things I'm now spending my time on is supporting new entrepreneurial companies in terms of how they look at doing zero carbon and what are they going to be the companies and the innovations of tomorrow. And that's what I hope young people really can do, is take that step and become part of the answer and not get left on the outside. I'm going to leave it there if that's okay. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Lots of great ideas. Simon, who, by the way, has previously opened his eco house. Haven't you, Simon?
Yep, I have, yeah.
Do you propose to do so again?
If somebody organises a scheme, yeah, I think there's people in this room who are inspired what we've done, cutting the emissions from our house from 12 tonnes a year to less than 1, who went away and did things in their houses. So yes, it's a good thing to do to demonstrate what can be done.
Thank you. Right, so Simon's already been dragged into the discussion, but let me introduce him. My fault. So Dr. Simon Pickering is an ecologist and environment advisor for Ecotricity, co-chair of G1st Business Energy Group, and an advisor to Business Declares. Simon has been a professional ecologist for over 40 years. He's helped designed and helped create internationally important wetlands and introduced beavers to Gloucestershire before it became popular. And he's also advised government on issues including human disturbance of wildlife, bats, and wind turbines. Simon project managed one of the first commercial water source heat pump systems by solar power in Gloucestershire. He's retrofitted his own 200-year-old Grade 2 listed house, reducing emissions, as he's just mentioned, from 12 tonnes to less than 1 tonne, saving over £3,000 a year on energy bills. He's rich, stick with him. That's 13% return on his investment. Simon recently stood down after 21 years as a Green councillor on Stroud District Council, where, as chair of the Environment Committee, he oversaw the council cutting its waste to landfill by 50%, the development of nationally acclaimed natural flood management, and the council becoming the first carbon neutral council in Europe. I'll give you our very own Dr. Simon Pickering.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and thank you very much for that introduction. I'm not quite sure what I can add after those 3 splendid speakers, so I'm going to talk about something slightly different, but it has relevance. Whakapapa, flamingos, 3 hoops, and looking back from the future. Whakapapa is a Maori concept. If anybody saw Owen Eastwood's talk last in the subrooms, you'll know what I'm talking about. It takes that we are each of us part of an unbreakable chain of people going back in time to our early ancestors and forward to the end of time. As the sun rises, as it does every day, across our ancestors, the sun passes us, so we have our time in the sun before passing on to future generations. When the sun shines, we are strong, we are alive, and we are carrying the shared heritage and culture and knowledge of our tribe. It's those experiences and wisdoms of those who walked in the light before us that are passed on and we pass on to future generations. In Whakapapa, you are judged not by your celebrity, your money, your sense of pride, but what you have done for the tribe during your time in the sun and worked with the tribe as part of the team. The concept has been successfully translated into sports team management. The All Blacks, well, it didn't do some good today, the Proteas, the South African cricket team, and even the 3 Lions under Gareth Southgate, bringing them the most successful campaign since 1966. Even startup businesses, this concept of Whakapapa is used. It means that everybody's got a common shared understanding. They're comfortable with where they're going, and there's no leaders or within there. There's no ego within there. So it's been part of the shared culture and success. It's about handing on to the next generation. We're not all of one kin in this room. We're not from the same sports team, or even the same political party, probably. But we are in Stroud, right here and now, and it is our time in the sun. Activism is part of the heritage of Stroud. Going back to the Chartists nearly 200 years ago, they may be your heritage of why you're an activist. Or perhaps your activist ancestry goes back to Michael Benfield, Freda Sanders, Tony and Leslie Whitaker from Coventry, who met in that pub in Bedworth to form the People's Party, which became the Green Party. Or Graham Searle and Anna Potter, the early activists within Friends of the Earth England in 1971. Or it may have been more recent activists from Stroud that are your ancestry in terms of activism, who think you've got that from. But one of the distinguishing features of activists, environmental activists in Stroud, is that they nearly always win. Not always, but nearly always win. And they don't just protest to win, they then take action. More and more than often are not buying the building they're trying to save. Starting a new trust, starting a new organisation, starting a new business, as Juliet said, really important. Stroud Preservation Trust, Stroud Valleys Project. We are, you and I, and all of us here, are part of that Stroud activist. I would argue, I will put it to you, in fact, that we are part of that Stroud activist tribe, working together to stop the destruction of something we care deeply about, the human race. And we are setting about the place to make it better. If you don't already feel part of this tribe, we, these people in this room, can help you understand the culture of the activist tribe and work with you so you can be brought in and work with us. I actually came, and this activist change in Stroud, it actually attracts people to Stroud. And it kick-starts new campaigns and movements. If anybody saw Mary Porter speaking in the subrooms last Saturday, it was amazing. You know, the queen of bling and buy is completely transformed since she's come to Stroud with her economy, kindness economy. I actually came here over 30 years ago to study flamingos at Slimbridge and was fortunate enough to know Sir Peter Scott for a brief period before he died. He was not just the founder of WWT, but also the World Wildlife Fund. One of Peter's tenets in life was to always ask himself whether what he was doing today would have a benefit to the natural world in 100 years' time. But with climate change, we don't have 100 years. So I'm not asking you to think 100 years ahead, but what I am doing is asking all of you to think just 10, 20, 30 years ahead. Our ability to imagine the future is essential to the human condition. It's unique. And elite performers, be they sportsmen and women, actors, surgeons, bomb disposal experts, take advantage of this human ability, this insight to mentally rehearse their actions and the performances through visualization. So I'm asking you, can you use this human ability to create forward memories and go forward and visualize the success in combating climate change? What would it feel like to be successful emotionally, physically with your fellow campaigners? What would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it smell like? And then can you create a forward memory of what part you played, your part in the tribe, your time in the sun, saving the human race? Be that political, commercial, teaching, whatever. What role did you play? Can you imagine looking back and thinking what role you played over the next 10 years? Up to about 60% of your carbon footprint can be changed by personal choice. I'm going to use this green circle, your personal carbon footprint. However, a lot of it will be much easier to change if government changed their policies and made it much easier for you to change your carbon footprint. And this is my bit of props. Tell her I was a fan of Blue Peter as a child. So that's the overlap, yours, and this is what government will help you do. And government actually needs you. I mean, it's one of the things that clearly come out of COP that's changed. It's moving from big business in this country or big government in this country. All of us are going to have to change to align with government policy. But also, business is also important. And business is there to provide the stuff, the jobs, whatever. And so there's an overlap there. But as Juliet says, business needs real incentives from government to actually change. I mean, we think we live in a free market. That is complete and utter bollocks. The subsidies to fossil fuels and the subsidies completely things that are destroying the planet are terrible. We need to completely change them. And so there is, I would argue, in my green circles, an interlinking between your personal action, government action, and businesses action. Some of it you take and some of it you put pressure on government and business. Now imagine the shared joy and exuberance of winning that next campaign to create a new cycle track. Or to stop Smith selling water in plastic bottles. Why does Smith sell water in plastic? I have no idea. Or that campaign to remove VAT from insulation materials. Or can you imagine the smells and sounds of the day the second station in Stonehouse reopens? And can you envisage how you got there? Can you imagine those crucial meetings that you were in, saying the right thing to the right person at the right time? That crucial email that took 50 of you activists together to craft so carefully that changed the argument. So I'm asking you to think forward and then think back and envisage and imagine what you are going to do. And from tomorrow, when you wake up, can you imagine what part in Stroud Activism Tribe you're going to do that day, tomorrow? It is your day in the sun, our day in the sun, part of that unbroken chain linking you from your ancestor activists to hopefully people in 100 years' time enjoying their time in the sun in Stroud. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. Now, let's see if anyone has a question or a comment from the audience. If you do, you might say which member or members of the panel you think you're directing your speech at. We have Raja at the back with a roving mic waiting for you. And Tim, have we got anything coming through on the Zoom? Not at the moment. Yes, sir. Can you take your mask off for a minute while you speak?
Hi, this isn't a very well-formed question, but I was recently at a conference in London for the music industry to go green. It's called Music Declares. And there was various panels throughout the day. And the main takeaway from that was that these businesses are, excuse my language, shit scared that they won't have a business. And if, you know, because with the music industry, it relies a lot on virgin plastics. So small companies make most of their money selling vinyl records and CDs. Downloads and the big streaming companies do not pay the artists, and the revenue streams are very difficult. And it's the idea that we're in a free market is utter bullshit, because like streaming sites like Spotify, the 5 main companies own the main playlists, so small companies can't get in. It's a total stitch up. So the only way that smaller companies can survive in that ecosystem is by selling vinyl records and CDs. So there's a whole load of, that's a huge supply chain that goes around the world. You know, we've got vinyl being shipped over from the States, we've got vinyl being shipped over from Europe, and it's first generation plastics. Now, they're not the biggest user of vinyl. Vinyl is the big industry, and the record industry is a small percentage of that vinyl output. But the basic thing is, it's a general question, and I've thought about this and I can't think of a solution. So this is a general question. How, if your business is dependent on product that is, unsound, i.e. vinyl, virgin plastics, whatever it is, records or whatever, how can those businesses transform? I mean, what is the route? I mean,
Okay, thank you. I think we've got it. Who would like to?
I can have a crack at
Okay,
it.
Carla
And have a
and
crack.
Juliet. Okay, thank you. Carla.
Is this one on? It is, great. Thanks. Okay, so just much like your question, this answer is a bit of a punt, but I don't think that something like records and CDs are going to have that much of an environmental impact, because yes, they're made from virgin plastic, but they're not single use. You don't use them once and then throw them away. And there is always going to be, or at least hopefully you don't, and there is always going to be some need for plastics in society, or at least for the foreseeable future. And I don't really think any environmental activists are calling for plastic to be completely banned for all purposes. For example, I wear contact lenses. My life would be quite a lot harder if I couldn't wear contact lenses. They're made from plastic. You know, plastic is used for medical instruments and implants and things like that all the time, and life would be a lot harder without them. You know, the harm from things made from fossil fuels is predominantly from burning them or from single-use plastics that are then dumped into the environment. Plastics like that are you know, made from oil but are then used for a long time. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't have thought the industry needed to worry about that. I would have thought the industry needed to worry much more about the carbon footprint of touring, for example. And I know that Massive Attack, who are one of the active members of Music Declares, have recently been doing lots of work with, I forget which it is, but one of the universities, on looking at how to do zero carbon touring. And that's where, if I was involved in that, I'd be focusing my energy, I think.
Interesting. Thank you, Carla. Juliet.
And I'd echo quite a lot of what Carla's already said. I mean, I think as an industry, coming together is, first of all, a really good step, because trying to do it on your own is really hard. I think then I touched on the point, we have some amazing researchers and capability in the country in terms of thinking about what would a record that was a carbon sink look like? How do you actually lock carbon up potentially in the product itself? Go around it, that question, and then start to think about the circular economy piece to it. There will be an answer, it's just nobody's looked at it before. And it's quite possible, what quite often we get stuck in supply cycles because they've always been there. And in a sense, we don't put a really creative hat on to think about it. And this is why we actually need a wider set of thinking in our boardrooms. Because if everybody comes at it from the same angle, then you won't come up with a new way of doing things. But I think the collaboration with the research institutes is incredibly important. There is now funding. I encourage everybody who is thinking about this. There is innovation funding to start to look at these things. There is money there to help industries go through this process. And I think coming together as an industry is a very good way of doing it, collaborating and finding ways forward. And then maybe, I mean, I know there's organizations, you probably know them already, Julie's Bicycle, they can support you going through this.
Thank you. Simon.
Just agree with everything that's been said, but also research and innovation. Sorry, did I do something? I'm sorry. Research and innovation is crucial. I recently went around a tour of Aston University's Bioenergy Research Unit. They have a strong belief that we will be growing our own carbon in 30 years, 20, 30 years time, and that will be the source of all our plastics. It can be grown, it just requires the funding to actually make it ready, so it's market ready. It's technically possible to do it. It's just an innovation gap that needs funding of somebody to actually fund it from the research lab to make it viable.
Yeah, and quite on that, actually having businesses saying they want it really helps the researchers and then the government. So it kind of comes together.
Thank you. Tim, do you have a question from the Zoom?
Yes, and we've got an audience of about 50 people joining us online as well. So
welcome to them.
Two questions from them. The first from Andy relating to Think Global, Act Local. I think a policy question for Carla, particularly around, does the Green Party support actions to protect high quality agricultural land from large housing developments? And then Link Liz Child asking around where we've promoted solar energy, building new solar farms, when do we consider that the next solar farm becomes detrimental? For example, does a productive organic egg farm get forced out of business while we build another solar farm, and we lose a stallholder from the market as a result. How do we deal with those trade-offs that we might hit at a local level? And Liz is asking, are we prepared?
Well, I think that's two, that's
those
enough for now.
consequences?
So the first was, remind us of the first one?
So the first is protecting agricultural land from housing, and the second is when those consequences hit us really locally, are we prepared for the
Okay.
trade-offs?
Who on the panel wants to?
So I think the first one was specifically aimed at me. I would say that the Green Party's policy, which I think is common sense, is simply that you would assess that and make the decision on a case-by-case basis. So as you would expect, we don't have a policy that is either always housing or always farmland. It depends on the quality of the land, the proximity to public transport links and all of those kind of things, and then you weigh up the costs and the benefits. But I do agree with the kind of underlying point to that question, which is that how we use our land is very important. The person who asked the question might be interested, if they're not already aware of it, in Centre for Alternative Technologies Zero Carbon Britain 2030 report, which was one of, if not the first bit of research that talked in detail about, okay, if we're going to reach zero carbon, not just how do we do it, but how do we use all of the land available in the UK differently to how we do it currently. And one of the interesting things that came out of that was that on land use alone, it's a strong argument for dramatically reducing the amount of meat and dairy that we consume as a society, because meat and dairy is so inefficient of productive land compared to growing food on it and eating it yourself. And I'm quite certain that there will be stuff in that report about the balance between agricultural and housing land as well, but I read it a while ago and I can't remember. But do look it up because it's on their website and it's really good, and it has some great graphics that are quick to understand as well.
Thank you, Simon.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think the key to remember is that housing allocations are largely imposed by government. Planning policy makes it very difficult to allocate housing to grade 1 land, but one has to remember that much of the farmland in this country is declining dramatically. In Stroud District, the Wislow development, it was grade 1 in the 80s, it's now grade 3B, because it has been pushed within an inch of its life. 10, 15 doses of agrochemicals, compacting, that is destroying our farmland. Yes, we shouldn't be building housing on it, but solar farms is another interesting one, which I'll just mention in a minute. But the other thing we have to remember is that much of the land in this country is used for growing food for animals. We just one crop, wheat. We grow 14 million tons of wheat in this country, of which 6 is for human consumption. The rest is animal feed. And a significant proportion of that is exported to the European animal feed market. It's not even in this country. And if you think longer term with solar farms.
Sorry, Simon, I'm going to leave the solar question for a minute.
Okay, I'll shut up.
No, but we'll let Juliet answer on that. Thank you. We'll come back.
So actually it follows on quite nicely. So what's interesting about solar farms is, particularly if you put them on land that has been degraded, it's going to give, first of all, you can take them away. They're not very difficult to remove. Secondly, I think we're going to see an improvement in soil because they're not going to be intensively used in the same way as they were. And thirdly, you can actually still use them for agriculture when you're there. One of the most interesting technologies I've just seen recently is where they're being used in combination with vines in France. So they're actually quite high. They act as a shade because particularly as we're going to increase in temperature, we're going to see a lot of these plants not be able to cope, but they still allow lighting. They basically are on stilts. So there's quite a lot of space between the vineyard and the solar panels. So you're generating power. You're also protecting the plant from frost and from extreme heat. So I think we just need to be more creative with the way that we use land so that we can use it both for agricultural purposes, for energy purposes, and actually for living purposes. And I don't think we thought properly any piece of land should be able to be used for everything.
Thank you.
Especially solar power and wine. That's a good combination.
I'll send you the link. It's very cool.
No, Juliet has said exactly what I was going to say.
Oh,
So,
okay.
mate, we're a great double act. You know. The only thing I would add to that is that we do have this organisation who it may be part of your tribe called the Council Protection of Rural England. They don't like tall solar panels. And it is a real issue in terms of actually innovations, which Juliet was talking about. I think it'd be wonderful that the Severn Vale was used for solar and for growing all sorts of crops. Thank you.
Okay. Tim, would you remind us of the second question, please?
So the second question was around that local trade-off.
Okay. Shall we go back to Simon, then you kick us off on that one, Simon?
In terms of the local trade-off, in terms of local planning policy, having got 2 local plans through a council, it's a complete nightmare, to be quite honest. You do have to balance what is being enforced on you by government. If you don't do it, you get planning powers taken away, to come up with a compromise. And the best areas for housing aren't always the politically acceptable ones. And this is why you end up with a complete hodgepodge across the district, because you end up with political compromises. I mean, not this local plan that we've got now, we had a bit more of a consensus, but certainly the 2014 local plan, running up to that, I can say this now because I'm not a councillor, running up to that going through council, there was frantic phone calls, literally the days before it went to committee and even in the afternoon, with trade-offs of what could happen. And the only way we got it through on Stroud that time was that we talked to some of the Conservatives who would support it, which allowed some of the Labour councillors to abstain. And so, and it,
okay, smoke-filled rooms.
Well, had we gone for allocating a big allocation at Stonehouse, which is where I live, where I wanted the housing, we would almost certainly be, you know, 9/10 of the way to get a second station at Stonehouse. But politics gets in the way.
Right, thank you. Do we have another question in the room? Yes, is it Chloe? And then gentleman in the second back row.
Good evening. I was just wondering, it's been widely reported that this COP has been a bit different to previous ones, and that there's been a much higher presence of corporates, lobbyists, particularly the fossil fuel lobby. And I wondered, particularly those who are there, so Carla and Juliet, what we can take away from that is the things that the Green Party and other politicians with the green agenda, things that we might maybe need to do differently to increase our voice in the face of that.
Thank you, Juliet.
So thanks, Chloe. I mean, I think it was extraordinary how many corporates were there, and I mean, I saw the entrance into the blue zone, which was a maelstrom. I mean, there were a lot of suits walking through. It was very difficult to get in.
Could you just explain about what the blue zone is?
The blue zone is where all the action goes on. It's where all the negotiation goes on. So it's where all the delegates are influenced about what position they're going to be taking. And I think that's what we all have to remember, is that when we look at people look at Australia has been immensely influenced by the coal industry for the last 30 years, which I find extraordinary, actually, because a lot of Australia's coal mines are actually owned by the Indians. So it sort of makes no sense, but it's kind of part of their culture almost. And so you will have had the coal industry speaking to the ears of the Australians at that point. So if you think about each country, it has its own entourage of sort of political lobbyists. And if you want to break through that, one, you have to be there. You do have to try and make yourself present. Two, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I would encourage more businesses in this sector, because there needs to be another voice in the room. Because if the politicians are just hearing one sector, they then have to be the other part of that sector in the room. They can't balance it. And actually what they need is another voice to listen to. And I think that's so important. And that's why everybody needs to be there, to be honest. It's not just about business. It's not just about politics. It's about every part of that. We need to hear from the scientists. We need to hear from individuals. And we need to hear from the people of tomorrow, from the skill sets of tomorrow, from our future. And that's why, I mean, I sat next to a behavioral psychologist who was talking about this, and he described it as an orchestra. And everybody plays their roles. And if you're a campaigner, say you're the bass drum, you're not going to suddenly start playing the oboe. And there needs to be an oboe player and a bass drum to make it all come together. And I think that's the point, is everybody should play their role. And so we just, even if you're not in the blue zone, I think there was huge influence going on outside, and there was a huge energy there. It did feel a bit depressing coming home, to be honest, when you just look at how much work we need to do, and there seemed to be quite a lot of hot air, but we just need to keep going.
Okay, Julie, Carla.
Yeah, this was my first COP, so I can't tell you whether this was typical or not in terms of the number of lobbyists there, although I've certainly heard similar complaints about lobbyists at previous ones that I was watching from home. I didn't have a pass for the blue zone where the negotiations happened, so I was up there very much in a public facing role, doing panels and press and things like that. And that is arguably one of the other problems with COP, is that there is no official role or way of getting a pass for opposition politicians of any government. So the UK was represented by the Conservatives. That's it. We were not even represented by the Scottish government because they didn't count as far as COP was concerned. So you'll probably all be aware that the Greens are now in government in Scotland. I haven't got over that novelty yet. But they, some of them did have passes for the blue zone. I think Patrick Harvey and at least one of the other MSPs was in there. But they basically got them through other means. And from Green Party of England and Wales, Amelia Womack and Natalie Bennett were in the blue zone. And Molly, I can't remember if you were or not. And now I can't see you. You're hiding behind the door. But Amelia and Natalie were there with other hats on. As far as I understand, at every COP there's a mad scramble where all Green Party politicians try and figure out what other hats they can possibly get to COP wearing. So that's one of the other problems. Thankfully, the silver lining is that the Global Greens, which is the international organisation of Green parties across the world, effectively counts as an NGO as far as COP is concerned. So although representatives of individual Green parties can't attend in the blue zone, delegates of the Global Greens can. And so that's the hat that Amelia was wearing. But Amelia was, I think, the only person from Green Party of England and Wales, because they were rightly prioritising delegates from the Global South to attend. And there were several of those there, which was great to see. But yes, I agree with you. The balance of who was there was ridiculous. Lobbying needs better regulation generally, and especially at conferences like that. And of course, I would say this, but it would be great to get more Greens there.
Thank you. There's a gentleman at the back, and then there was a lady over there. Is it Catherine? And then this lady at the front. Okay.
We've heard lots of ideas about things we can do on the track to zero carbon, but there's kind of another side to all of this that's been very much squeezed in this COP, which is, looks like all the loss and damages stuff has been pushed out into a talking shop going forwards. So I've been thinking for a while, I think it seems very unlikely that we're going to see any kind of climate reparations happening on a governmental level in any kind of near future. There's too much worry in the rich north that the liability of acknowledging that would be limitless, and they're too panicked to go anywhere near it. So is there a role for community or intercommunal climate reparations? Are there ways in which we could imagine a community in the rich north, which might be Stroud, it might be groups within Stroud, it may even be individuals, raising money or dipping into their own savings and sending that money directly to communities in the global south. So intercommunal reparations, I think it'd be a very interesting idea to explore. I'm wondering whether anyone knows of anything like that happening already, or what you think about it.
Thank you, Dave. Dan, do you just want to give a gut reaction to that idea?
I think that sort of thing will be very important. And I also think it's not necessarily a new thing. But if you think back to LGSM, so lesbian and gay support the minors, of that sort of working together between groups across physical space, I think that's going to be an important aspect of our futures. So I think it's something we should probably be aiming for. I don't know whether there are current movements more to do with climate change, but that's mine.
Sorry, loud and clear, please.
The new aspect would be if it was taken on board as reparations, because I think it makes you think about how life, our comforts, our privilege is based upon our historical carbon debt, etc.
Thank you. Simon, do you want to comment on this? You don't have to.
No, well, I've got some thoughts, but does anybody else want to comment?
I've got a few.
We'll go Simon and then Carla.
Okay. I don't know of any projects that are addressing reparations. That's a really interesting concept. Obviously, it's community to community work does go on, but not necessarily paying for the damage. Obviously, we all know John Meadley, and you can support his toilet projects in, is it Liberia or whatever he's doing, whether it's direct. But no, it's a really interesting opportunity. I can see risks in that it could be taken over by corporate offsetting, in that people paying for their damage, and there's always a risk in that. I think it's a really interesting idea. I mean, the closest I know is the Gola project with the RSPB, although they're not directly affected by climate change, they are affected by deforestation. And there is an international, BirdLife International is working to preserve the forest, but also there's an income from the chocolate there, so that there is an interaction there, and that's a recognition of it. But I don't think it's called intercommunal reparation. And if anybody else knows.
Okay, Carla, let's go to you.
I think that's a really interesting question, and it's got me thinking. I'm not aware of any current inter-community reparations across countries like that. Off the top of my head, it could, I mean, many towns and cities in the UK already have twinned towns. That was a scheme that was originally set up post World War II between British and German towns, but in many cases is now extended to towns and cities across the world. And I know that, for example, Bristol is twinned with lots of places in the global south as well. So that could be a way of doing it where there's existing links. There's also other international networks that some, but not all councils are part of. I know Bristol is plugged into the Global Parliament of Mayors, but that would only apply to cities that have mayors. C40 cities, things like that could be ways of doing it. But that's inevitably only going to be the bigger, more already internationally plugged in places, which might mean that the ones that need it the most aren't getting it. Other than that, yeah, I mean, it seems like a good idea. It seems like something that one of the international aid charities would be in the best place to facilitate, but I don't know any that are doing it at the moment. Another way of framing inter-community reparations might be not just going overseas, but for communities of people of colour in the UK who are from the Global South, from former empire countries, and setting up reparations for people that still face disadvantage now because of those historical wrongs. If it's something you're interested in following up on, grab me afterwards, and I'm very happy to put you in touch with Cleo Lake, my former councillor colleague in Bristol, and Scott Ainsley, who's a councillor in Lambeth in London. Those are the two within the Green Party who've been leading on the idea of climate reparations and who led the motions that passed on those two councils recently about those two councils looking into how they could pursue reparations for their cities' particular roles in the transatlantic slave trade. So yeah, if you're interested, grab me afterwards and I'll put you in touch.
Thank you, Carla. Let's go to Catherine and then this lady at the front.
Thank you. I have a question about energy. You talked about the gas grid, Juliet, and decarbonising heat. And I'm wondering how quickly this can scale up to meet net zero carbon targets in terms of changing gas boilers, air source heat pumps and other things. And then on the energy generation side, what can government, business and citizens do to demand and scale up renewable energy so that we can actually meet those targets that have been set at COP?
Should we start with Juliet?
Yeah. So the first thing we have to do and should do is insulate our homes. We have the worst housing stock in Europe, other than Belgium, I think, maybe slightly worse. So if you sort of any transformation in terms of heat, particularly if we're going to electrification of heat, we shouldn't be wasting electricity in our homes. Also, if you go to a heat pump, it's a much lower temperature heat, so you need the home well insulated. So that's absolutely number one, and that's where our focus should be. In terms of the speed of moving that, one of the issues we have with our retail energy bills is that the gas bill has no extra costs on it. The electricity bill covers 25% of our electricity bill is the support mechanisms that go to renewables. And gas doesn't cover any of that. So if we think about a carbon tax, it's an inverse carbon tax, essentially currently on our electricity and gas bills. And if you swap those around and you put that subsidy on the cost of that subsidy onto the gas bill in a form of a carbon tax, heat pumps would be cheaper than a gas boiler today. And so that would mean, and that would be one of the key things. It's one of the things that's being pushed for immediately at the moment. In terms of the speed of rollout, obviously the government's just announced their support for heat pumps with the 5,000. And actually, I mean, a lot of people have criticised it, but people with smaller homes, it's actually quite effective because it's the bigger systems that cost more money. If you've already got a small, relatively well insulated home, it's actually quite a good subsidy to support a transition. How fast can we do it? Well, first of all, one of the big issues we've got is a skills shortage and a capability shortage to be able to roll it out. And it has to be, I keep coming back to this, it's something that we all forget, is that we actually need businesses to go out and do that, and we don't have them at the moment. And that is something we have to look to government to support those kinds of roles, those kind of apprenticeships, to really get people into the sector to be able to roll out at speed.
Thank you. Maybe something Stroud College could help with. Simon, do you want to comment on this?
Only briefly, that I do know that both Berkeley Green College, Cirencester College, Gloucester University of Gloucester and Stroud College are all desperately trying to get courses up and running to do just this. But the government doesn't seem to want to fund them. It's absolutely insane. And some of there are opportunities, but they're really scrabbling around. I'm sitting wearing my left hat, and I've seen some of the curricula. I saw the plumbing. I got sent the plumbing curriculum from T-level from Cirencester, and I think it had one paragraph on heat pumps and things, you know. And they were wanting to know what we could do, because I'd once said in a talk that I'd overseen project managed installing a couple out in the Cotswold water park. They thought I was an expert. I did actually tell them to go and talk to a couple of people I knew who were experts in it. So, but they really are scrabbling. I think the industry, in terms of the original question, the gas and electricity grid industry, their vision is decarbonising the whole of the heat system by 2045. It's a bit of a long way off. And there is quite a bit of work done by the gas utilities, and this is really controversial with the air source heat pumps guys, in that they are looking at minimal disruption of your house and an air source heat pump, because they've done a lot of work in Wales. They did a big project looking at how much disruption people would take in terms of changing radiators and insulation. Because one thing Stroud did when we started retrofitting some of the bungalows, old people's bungalows, we put solar panels on and air source heat pumps. But we also insulated the houses, but we also had to change quite a few of the radiators to resize them. And I think this study found that only about 10 to 15% of people would accept the level of change to their house in an old house. And so there are coming onto the market some combined air source heat pump gas boilers. Now it's a bit weird, and it's always being promoted by the gas utilities. However, it is happening, and they are claiming, and I've no idea whether it's right or not, they are claiming that they can heat your house for 80 to 85% of the year using an air source heat pump and only use the gas in deep midwinter. I have seen some vicious arguments from the air source heat pump people who say it means your heat pump's just out of kilter. I don't know. It's going to be a Wild West out there for a while, I think.
Thank you. No, it was the lady down at the front there, and then Bob at the back.
Dan spoke about hope, and as someone who just had to explain climate change to a 2- and 4-year-old before the recent vigil in Stroud, this was the balance between truth and hope is something at the forefront of my mind. And I was wondering, I feel a real responsibility to young people and young adults to help hold a space for hope as well as a space for truth and reality. And I was wondering what you and maybe some of the other panelists would get the most hope from. If there was a change within Stroud that would give you hope, what would that be?
I'm going to start with Dan.
So in terms of the truth side of it as well, I think most people, at least my age, we know lots about climate change. We've been heard about it in the news, we've been taught about it in lessons to some extent. So at least on the older side of youth, we know lots of the truth about it. But as I said before, I think the hope has got to come from seeing at least some tangible change now. So I'm not always as clear from my point of view of what that would be. I think that's where lots of the people who've had more time in this area come in much better. But I think it is that tangible change of seeing whether it is the train station being operational or a bus service or the countless other examples that could actually impact people's lives now. I think that's where the hope can come in, is if people can see community action having an impact, then feel empowered to take their own ambitions into activism. I think that's where the hope can come from.
Thank you, Dan. Juliet.
So if I was going to give you hope and an active thing, I think we should make Stroud zero carbon. I mean, have an ambition to make the whole town zero carbon. I mean, it's really interesting. There are two cities, sort of one in Finland, one in Estonia, which are going zero carbon. They've started a personal carbon trading system, and they're testing out. And actually, if you go by bus, you get free coffee. There's a kind of whole piece in there that to actually make this fun, make this enjoyable, show that life is actually better when it's zero carbon, not worse. Because what we're constantly told by everybody is that if we save, if we reduce carbon, life looks worse. And actually, why should it look worse? Our homes will be warmer, our air will be cleaner, And we'll probably eat better food and we'll be healthier. So what isn't good about that? So from a hope point of view, we need to set ourselves ambitious targets as communities and demonstrate to the next generation we can deliver on that and talk about why it's great. So, I mean, just one tiny thing, I put a heat pump in at home. I replaced a horrible oil boiler. One of the first things I noticed is it didn't stink outside my house in the winter. And the only person I could smell is my next door neighbor because he's still got an oil burner. But just that simple step. I mean, don't forget that a gas boiler or an oil boiler in our homes is actually burning fuel and it's producing fumes at a localized level as well as a carbon level. And life looks better.
I don't have an additional point, but I have a nice couple of examples of those 2 points. I completely agree that just, getting tangible changes, even if they're small to start with, is what gives people hope. And certainly, I feel like you could plot my mood against small wins I've had as a councillor, and they would correlate pretty strongly in terms of, oh, thank God for that. It is occasionally worthwhile doing all this shit. And Anya, as a former colleague of mine, can probably attest to that. And in terms of sort of slightly reframing what Juliet said, George Monbiot has did a TED talk about this, and other people have as well. Gregory Normington as well. That part of the problem is that as a society, as the whole of humanity, we're a storytelling species. We live by narrative. We understand the world by narrative. And there are very, very few stories that tell a future where climate change exists and we dealt with it. So most stories that are set in the future are either climate change doesn't exist and it's just a lovely rom-com, or, futurescape or whatever, and climate change isn't mentioned, it didn't happen in this parallel universe, or apocalypse. There's very little, it was a problem, we got over it together, and then things were lovely. Or even things were horrible for a bit and then they were okay again. And if we want society at large, those of us that aren't already climate activists, to understand that what we're asking for is a positive thing that they should want too, we need creatives in society. We need, artists, writers, filmmakers, etc., to paint that picture for us. So if any of you are in those industries, that's my challenge to you.
I think we need songs too.
Songs, yeah.
Simon.
Just briefly, I think we need courage, not hope. And we need a vision and not hope for something. We actually need, as I was trying to say, we need to envision what it will be like when we've won the fight against climate change and what that lifestyle will be like. I did a run out of because I was asked this a little while ago by Bisley Can Group, BizCan or whatever they are. There's a little video of me talking about what a zero carbon lifestyle would look like. It wasn't one of my best performances, I will give you that. And I've been thinking about it exactly along these lines over the last sort of while. Of actually, when I've got some time, revisiting that presentation to actually describe what I think will be a carbon zero lifestyle will be like. And then, yes, I need somebody to help me turn it into a story or a play or a exciting movie or something.
Thank you. We've got Bob at the back, and then Tim has something on the Zoom, and then we've got, is that Molly? And lady near the back there with her mask on. So Bob, and then Tim, and then Molly.
Thank you. Zero carbon, is that really what we're talking about? It seems to me what we really should be talking about is consumerism.
Is what? And
the dominance of the consumerist style, if you like, that we all share. I have to be careful. I work with refugees in various countries, poor people. If we argue that they're entitled to the same lifestyle that we're enjoying, then there is no hope. I'm sorry. it's not going to work. The earth can't sustain it, the demand that it makes. But the elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is the culture of consumerism. The culture which produces container ships of 340 meters long, carrying 40,000 containers, carrying goods that have been made somewhere else, from raw materials which have been dragged from somewhere else, which sustains us. So in a sense, I'm saying we're the problem. I was born pre-war. It was so different then. I've worked in Guatemala, if you like. I've worked in Algeria.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're not that audible. Could you tilt the microphone towards you? Currently, you're holding it like
I
this.
apologize. I'm sorry. So I've worked in places where people have very little. Somehow we seem to believe that consumerism is necessary to a satisfactory way of life. Seems to me that has to change. And nobody's really talked about it. Although I did miss a couple of speakers because I was on the door, but nobody seems to have touched on that. So I apologize for, sort of changing the spirit of the thing from hope to what I feel is the elephant in the room.
Thank you. Strong support in the room there. Dan, do you want to comment on that?
I think with consumerism, I agree with your points completely about we've got to change our outlook on it. And again, I think it's one of the things which is probably links to what was mentioned earlier about, I'm sure if you look at us, yes, in here, we still do consume, and that will be something that people will have to look at themselves. But it's also then going to be about going into the community to take those ideas forward of lessening your consumption, and if you have to consume more, thinking about where you're getting those products from. I think that's going to be where this has to go, is taking that message into wider communities to cause wider change, because it doesn't seem like the governments are going to be dampening down consumption on anything. This COP is anything to go by.
Thank you, Carla.
Yeah, it's a fair challenge. And yeah, it's sort of something about the framing of the event and the questions didn't get us onto that topic. I certainly wasn't consciously avoiding it, but it's a good point. I guess part of the reason it's not in the top of my mind is that it's not something that government can do as much about. There are things that government can do, but as now the co-leader of a political party in my new role, it's not something that I can sort of promise solutions to in the same way that I can some of the other things. However, my job, so I've been a councillor since 2015, but alongside that, I've had various part-time jobs. Currently, it's co-leader of the Green Party. But the one before that was actually policy and communications coordinator at a campaign called Ad-Free Cities. And I'm still a member, campaign against corporate outdoor advertising on a number of different fronts, but a big part of which is that it encourages consumerism. It persuades people that they need to buy things because they will in some way be inadequate human beings if they don't own this new shiny thing. There are other things that are wrong with advertising. The environmental impact of the adverts themselves, your average large lit billboard uses as much energy as 11 average UK homes, for example. Yeah, I know, right? And advertising also affects people's mental health by telling them that they're shit, basically, and often also has kind of equalities implications in that the adverts are often in the poorest areas of town, and they are often pretty anti-feminist. I could go on about this all day. It's something I care about a lot. I won't.
No,
but yeah, look up Ad-Free Cities if you're interested in it. They support local campaign groups to set up all over the UK. It started in Bristol with Adblock Bristol. We've now got half a dozen or so. If you wanted to set up an Adblock Stroud, I'm sure they'd be absolutely delighted to support you in doing so.
Thank you. Juliet?
You can't get to zero carbon unless you reduce the total amount of use of energy. So, I mean, that's an obvious part of that. Nearly, probably you need to reduce by about 30% per person in terms of the way you go forward. So it's an absolutely fundamental to zero carbon.
Simon?
I completely agree with you, Bob.
We shouldn't be buying all this crap shouldn't be being produced. And that's one of the interesting things about Mary Portas's new book. I'm not, no links to her, no financial links, but it's I can't believe, you know, the woman who's promoting us to go and buy all this crap from the high street is now promoting the economy of carbon. She's got it, which is important. And I think you're absolutely right. It is an elephant in the room. The only thing I can, one thing I can port to is an organisation called Carbon Savvy. Look up their website, and it's talking about one of the things when you actually, if you have to buy something, buy the highest quality, longest lasting product you can, on the grounds that it'll give you more pleasure using it because there'll be a quality bit of equipment and it'll last far, 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 far longer. But you're absolutely right with this. We have so much stuff that we don't actually need.
Thank you. I'm going to go actually to Molly. And then there was the lady there at the back who's waiting so patiently. And time is running low.
Thank you all. So I've got a political question. It may not entirely be within
Molly,
the
can you take your
brief.
mask off? We can't hear you.
You could hear me, couldn't you?
It's quite muffled.
Okay. So Carla already pointed to this survey by Demos and WWF that shows that the policies we say we should follow to address the climate crisis are really popular. And when you sit people down in a room and give them all the facts, they agree with the Green Party. This doesn't surprise me, but what does surprise me, if I can just briefly talk about the carbon tax again, 94% of people support a carbon tax, but when Parliament held a debate on it, only 4 MPs turned up. So to me, the question is, how do we close that gap between where people are, not just in this country, but again, across the world, knowing what we need to do and accepting the policies that we put forward, and the fact that we have so little power? I mean, obviously absurdly in this country, but also in other countries. How can we close that gap between what citizens want us to do and what politicians are actually implementing?
Marla and to Carla.
Okay. I mean, the obvious answer is get more Greens elected. But in the absence of that, I'm not sure I've got a good answer. If I knew how to persuade politicians from other parties to do what I wanted, then I'd have done that already. So yeah, pass over to anyone else who's got better ideas.
Molly, for my sins, as an intern in the European Parliament, I did actually work on the framework for carbon taxation at a European level many years ago. I mean, one of the biggest challenges with a carbon tax is that obviously if you impose it on an imperfect market, you can create worse situations. So I think one of the challenges is how do you strip back a market to make a carbon tax really effective? And I guess I think if you were going to make something like that more appealing to politicians, you would give them freedom to move taxation around. The point I made about the retail bill on electricity and gas, we should be able to move taxation on the electricity bill to the gas bill. And I think that is the way to really appeal to politicians, is give them some flexibility. Because if you just give them a carbon tax, they all get a bit freaked out about it. They worry they're going to get voted out at the next election because they put energy bills up. Not that the Russians are doing a pretty good job of that already. So I mean, that was it. I mean, a number of arguments we went through you can imagine at a European level, it all came out then, and I think it's still there. I think there's a massive fear amongst politicians about any kind of tax like this.
Thank you. I'm going to go to that lady there who's been waiting so long. Yes, you. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Not that long, it's fine. Kathy, I'd just like to say, obviously, local actions for our own mental health, for our own actual private contribution to reducing carbon footprint are critical. And having a Stroud focus, thinking of our tribe, is also incredibly helpful. But there is a danger that we walk away from here talking in terms of a carbon neutral Stroud, which is impossible, because we're so interconnected with the rest of the planet, that it's a bit cozy, it's a bit, dare I say, smug. and I'm not saying that anyone in this room thinks that, but it's just a message that could be misinterpreted. And so one of my visions of the future is where we haven't got huge tracts of land where local communities and wildlife and habitats are being displaced, killed, poisoned by, for example, the oft justifiably vilified carbon industries, but equally industries associated with our brave new world solutions, be it, lithium or batteries, the things associated with batteries for electric cars. So forgive me, it's partly a question, but partly just a heartfelt rant. Apologies. But I suppose one thing about COP for me is it's forced me to reconfront the horror of what is going on in the world. And what I'm pleased about, although I don't always like all the appropriated language and the potential insincerity, is people are talking openly about the merit of forests and the impacts of waste. What I'm trying to say is that's been aired, but whatever we can do as individuals, as a Stroud community, influencing our national government, influencing the complex, scary world of finance in terms of financing these operations all over the world. And any help or indication how to do that, I'm partly echoing what the chap said at the back, to be fair. And one last thing I'm going to say, actually, sorry, is we obviously need the ingenuity and the dynamism of private industry in all this, but we've all seen examples where people have got a good idea and gone sailing off, and suddenly, oh, that wasn't quite such a clever idea after all. It's but we need to be able to monitor and police and temper the multiple solutions that we're going to need. There's no one magic bullet. We all know this, and forgive me, I'm stating the blindingly obvious, but there's probably a question in there somewhere.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I've got my eye on the time, and I think, was Lynn waiting to speak? No? Right, we'll have that lady there. Is there anyone else in the room waiting?
I'll try and answer Kathy's question.
Well, you'll need to be very brief, Simon, and then that lady there.
It goes back with a question. It's a challenge to the audience. Is it impossible for Stroud to be carbon zero? It's an absolutely brutal target. I don't disagree, but it's a genuine question.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, this lady here.
Hi, Emily, and thank you for the emotion that the panel has brought, and I particularly was struck by what Dan shared and the need to have all voices heard, and who gets in and out the blue zone, who gets to say what happens. And it feels like there's a lot of accumulated power in this country, and maybe we can't directly implement it, but what does the panel think we could all do to influence fairer decision making in this country? I know that the Green Party supports the Make Votes Matter campaign and proportional representation, and it is tricky. This isn't directly within our power to implement, but if we're going to have fairer environmental and social justice, we know that countries that have proportional representation have better performance across those areas. So what could we collectively do in a hopeful, courageous way?
Thank you. Who on the panel wants to take that one? Juliet.
So I think we should hold the people who've never been held to account. There are so much part of our society, and particularly our business society, who've never been put on the spot. So one of the classic ones, and we're beginning to talk about it now, but still the pensions in the country. So how many people here have written to their pensions and demanded that they have green pensions? Okay, so that is something we can just do. It's really easy. It's a letter. You just need to send it to your pension company and ask them, where are your investments and why is it still in fossil fuels, or why is it still in tobacco, or whatever you're passionate about? Because all these things happen around us and we do have control. We just don't take control. All right, our local distribution company is something called Western Power Distribution. How many of you written to them to say that you demand that they put more systems in so we can connect more renewables?
Yeah, I can do that. No problem at all. They've just been bought actually by National Grid, so it might have even more impact. But it's all these hidden parts of our function that we don't hold to account. And we as individuals, we are all connected. I tell you, Western Power Distribution are concerned about us because we pay their bills. Nearly 25% of your electricity bills goes to pay them. So figure out, almost if you see where all your money goes each month, think about it. What about your mortgage provider? Who are they? What are they doing with your money? We have control. We have much more control than we believe that we do. And we've lived in a world, from my point of view, a bit of a nanny state, where we've been patted on the head because politicians don't want us to take interest. And actually we can just take interest by literally looking where we spent our money and demanding each point of when we spend our money that it gets spent well. And I know we've talked about consumerism, but we do spend money, and where we spend it is really important, and we don't. And so let's do more of that. I'm really happy to give Western Power Distribution numbers out to everyone to write about how they're making sure we connect more renewables.
Thank you. Carla.
So you took the words out of my mouth about a fair voting system. So I won't say that back to you, other than to feed you a very useful statistic or fact, which is that the UK Labour Party is the only social democratic party in Europe that still supports first past the post. When you're speaking to Labour people, remind them of that. Every other Labour or social democratic party in Europe recognises that a fair voting system is part of the fair society they're fighting for, but Labour in this country have not grasped that.
Just as a point of information, I gather that most of the members support it, and the problem is the unions.
That's right. And one of the unions has come around since Labour Party conference. Unite have come around. And so while we haven't got the Labour Party there yet, there is hope, I think. I just belatedly, I thought of an answer to Molly's question about how to persuade politicians from other parties about things like carbon tax. I think part of the answer, other than just us repeatedly saying in interviews, 94% of people support blah, blah, blah. And by the way, it wasn't just carbon tax. The other top 6 things in that list were also Green Party policy things, like a frequent flyer levy, for example. But another thing that I think can help with that is citizens' assemblies, because especially a local citizens' assembly, we've had one in Bristol recently, will show the administration of the council that not just hypothetical people somewhere in the UK, but actual people in the city that will vote for them or not at the next election have said that they want this. And I think I think citizens' assemblies can be used much more for that.
Thank you. But that's our last question from the person with their hand up there, and then I have some things to say to you all.
Should members of the panel and the Green...
Sorry, can't hear you at all.
Should members of the panel and the Green Party as a whole be in strong support of civil disobedience?
Dan? Let's see what you might think.
I can't speak for the Green Party as a whole, but I think civil disobedience, at least some aspects of it have been very positive, at raising awareness and giving people a voice in the past however many years now. I think there is a line to toe sometimes in terms of where the public stands of who you want to win over. But I think overall, so many of the civil disobedience acts, it's getting the message out there that's so needed. So I think most of them, I think lots of people support, at least in principle. And obviously I come from a position of leading some of those movements, which may not have achieved as much tangible change, which is where I think lots of the movements need to get better at, but at least brought it to more people's attention.
Thank you very much, Dan. Do you want to say anything, Juliet?
I just make my orchestra analogy again. I think there is a role for all of us, and we take an individual decision on where we want to play that. And it is important. Every part of that is important.
Simon?
Yes.
Thank you.
If it's focused and targeted and does what it's meant to do, raises the profile, actively stops something, I think it's important. Yeah.
Thank you, Carla.
Yes, the importance of protest and non-violent direct action is written right into the core principles of the Green Party. The importance of that in a healthy democracy and in getting change when the traditional democratic methods are not working or not working fast enough. I have been a direct action activist in the past. I do still think it's important. The reason I've chosen the path I have is because of my particular strengths and weaknesses. In a nutshell, I have a very poor tolerance for sitting on the ground outside in cold weather. I have a very high tolerance for sitting in a long, boring meeting, reading long, boring reports. And so
someone's got to do it.
So, yeah, exactly. So back to the orchestra analogy, the best way that and also acknowledging my privilege, I brush up nicely in a blazer, I have a very RP accent, I'm more likely to be able to, from the inside, do some of the persuading. And I'm not very good at climbing things. But there's a role for everyone, absolutely. I think of it as like a pincer movement from the inside and the outside rather than an orchestra, but whatever analogy you choose, there is a role in the movement for everyone.
Thank you. Now, 3 things. The first is there are so many people that we need to thank. So I will just say to the staff of Lansdowne Hall, to all the volunteers who have given very selflessly of time and made cakes and helped us in so many ways, to our 4 speakers, and of course to yourselves for coming. Thank you all very much. I hope we all go away with things to do and hope and courage. The second thing is that the Green Party here is as strong as you make it. If you want the Green Party to be stronger, join us and give us some money and or give us some help. We're at full stretch and we're broke. Okay? And on that note, we have to pay nearly £250 for this hall. Go figure, see how many people are in the room. Please make a generous donation if you can afford it on the way out at the desk there. Because otherwise we have to stop campaigning and start fundraising, and we'd rather be campaigning. And finally, I'm going to ask people who were at COP, and that is Maggie and Molly, to come forward and give us a sentence each, if they would. You were at COP, please come forward. You'll notice that Maggie is sporting a very elegant protest coat.
I think people would like you to use the mic, either the runner mic or...
I decided to go up to Glasgow and join the March for the Global Day of Action. And it was inspiring, it was moving. It was great to be there. And there were so many different communities. But I have to say, coming home on the train and hearing all the news now, it just feels like it's a climate emergency and people don't get it. I'm alarmed. And I found your talk very moving.
Thank you, Maggie.
I actually also went for kind of personal reasons. I went to visit my daughter and I had a kind of rest and a good time as well as being involved. And I didn't apply for Blue Zone tickets because it completely does my head in seeing, seeing all those people. And so I wouldn't have been good value in the Blue Zone. The Green Zone was an appalling piece of trade show, greenwashing. It's the first time I've ever seen a COP where the whole thing's outsourced to the private sector, and I'm ashamed that our government did that. It was an utter disgrace. So like gaming for the planet, Formula One, sustainable Formula One, you know, I mean, the whole, when I got there, my daughter was already in a rage and we just went around raging at every store. But anyway, I'm gonna, she's caught it from me, I'm afraid. I'm going to say the most positive thing I can about it, which is it's truly amazing and impressive to see the world coming together like that. And because Glasgow is quite a small city, everywhere you are, you're bumping into people from Ghana or Brazil or whatever. And that was truly moving. And I think even though, you know, what India's done at the end is shocking and shameful, we have seen, just watching it on the TV, just listening to people speak, we've got an enormous global crisis here. And it's incredibly difficult for all those nearly 200 countries to come together and sort something out, or even agree something. I mean, I've done that in the European Union. You got 28 when I was there, and that was incredibly difficult. We're talking about, you know, nearly 200 countries. So I think we shouldn't underestimate how difficult that is. And I think the message about the urgency of this has really got out there because of what people like us have been doing. So I understand why you feel a sense of despair, and I can also be in that mode. But I do think the world has come together and something important's been negotiated there. Not everything has been lost. Obviously, we're all disappointed it's not stronger. But like we said, we've had this event to say something important's happened at COP, but it's down to us now. It's down to us to do what we can in our community and to keep that pressure on our politicians, because the sort of thing you've been doing has made a huge difference. And I know we've all been involved out there on the streets and at the march, like you said. So we are making a difference. We have to keep the pressure up because this is a life or death struggle. And yeah, we owe it to you and we owe it to ourselves. So that's my message from COP.
Thank you. And Carla would like to say one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was at COP. I basically agree with Molly's take, so I'm not going to add to that. I just wanted to come back to something Dan said about, you know, the youth strikes maybe not having a tangible impact. Actually, I think they did have a tangible impact. In particular, from my position as the author of that first climate emergency motion, you know, a lot of people give me a lot of plaudits for that. I think I was mostly lucky. I think that the Greens in Bristol and probably presumably everywhere else have been proposing motions much like that for the preceding 10 or 12 years, and no other party voted for them. And I think part of the reason they did is that it was in the zeitgeist, and part of the reason it was in the zeitgeist was Extinction Rebellion, the youth climate strikes, the forest fires that were happening that year, and the IPCC 1.5 degree report that came out just a few weeks before. And those all collided at the right moment, and the youth strikes and other direct action was definitely part of that. So
thank you. Good night, safe journey, please donate.